readable manual for sinks, hopefully that they would actually pick it up and read it themselves, to more it's supposed to be an intellectual piece about that. It became more a tactics and techniques manual has finally emerged from the corporate JCS staff. But nonetheless, we got started on that. We continued a very strong relationship with the Air Force down there. Bob Russ was the Air Force commander at Langley and Tactical Air Command. Frank Kelso was the SACLANT. So we had what I'd call a Peninsula Pachyderm Society made up of the four Ford baggers down there, another admiral in the Navy, Bud Edney, who was the Atlantic Fleet guy for a while, and all that worked pretty well. Kept up the enterprise of direct relationships with industry. Every 3 months had a group of them down there on esoteric subjects like directed energy weapons or acoustics.
This was your invitation, right?
Yeah.
This was, again, something sort of outside your mandate.
Well, but I perceived my mandate was stay in touch with industry.
Right, okay.
And
In the combat developments.
Combat developments, and sort of get on the front leading edge of a variety of that stuff. There was no particular resource squeeze at that time.
Right.
We began to look at ways to strengthen this mentoring concept by reallocation of people and strengthening our combat developments by solidifying what work would be done at the various branch schools versus what would be done at the service school, or at the Leavenworth and Fort Lee, Virginia, in terms of differentiating the level of work so we didn't have to repeat the work, and it was very useful. Spent an enormous amount of time at Leavenworth. General Wayne Knutson was our combat developer out there, and a very high-quality guy. David Maddox was my combat developer, as a sink usurer. So we had a first-class staff about that. John Crosby was the deputy, and we put him to work on a program for revitalizing training in the reserves. And that thing has sort of been a blueprint that's currently in vogue and doing quite well. He spent a considerable amount of time trying to jack up the level of competency and training in the reserves, and that is stuck and carried on.
Did that program include any diminution of the administrative requirements on reserve units?
No, there was sort of a manifesto of X number of items that ought to be done. We took it up to Bono, and he approved them all, and we got after it, and it takes a while to get it codified. On the matter of whether or not there was any specific program with regard to knocking off the amount of folderol and administration, I can't tell you. I can't attest to that. It had to do more with the effectiveness of training that we would carry out by various and sundry fiefdoms in the Guard and Reserve. Continued the press on quality installations, and we won back-to-back installation of the year, OSD installation of the year businesses. So took a big trip to China. Secretary of the Army asked me to go over there and do a major initiative in China. Took then Colonel Clark and several generals over there to one engineer guy named Stroop. Halliday is our chairman. Wes Hork was an armor guy.
Was it an assessment of the capability of the Chinese Army, or what?
Well, it was, actually, we had been training Chinese soldiers on use of the TPQ-36 and 37 radar at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, probably little known to the American populace. This is before Tiananmen Square. And they had asked to buy and did buy a couple of artillery locating radars, which they were going to put down on the Vietnamese border because the Vietnamese were lobbing 1,000 shells a day into southern China. And so I went over there to see that they had absorbed this item of equipment and did reasonably well. And when they went out with a shooting demonstration where they demonstrated they had indeed learned what it was we told them to do and could operate the equipment and maintain it and keep it going. But that was sort of a fascinating experience to go there. And I visited the various fiefdoms of the Chinese Army, and it's quite a bit of a provincial army. They were going through a downsizing. They were going to cut 25% of their armed forces. They're going to go down from 4.4 million people to 3.3 million people. And then they were going to take another 80,000 people, or 100,000, put them in the civil service. And I remember, no, it's not 80, another 20%, so 20% of 3.3 million, which would be 600,000. I recall one regional commander says to me, gee, do you have a civil service in your place? Yeah. I said, well, did they wear a uniform to come to work? And I said, no, there's civilians. We wear a civilian uniform. I said, I don't think that's going to work here. He said, we've been wearing uniforms for a long time. He said, we take our uniforms on, nobody know who we are. So they're going through that phenomenon, going through the downsizing phenomenon, and then they were going through the restoration of rank phenomenon.
Really?
And then Deng Xiaoping had gone to him and said, you need to be a 5-star general. And he said, no, I couldn't be a 5-star general. The most I could be would be a lieutenant general. Well, then there were a lot of guys thought they were going to be brigadier generals, so you didn't get to be brigadier generals, you see, because Deng Xiaoping had downgraded the top rank from 3-star or 5 stars to 3 stars. So they created 2 grades of colonel. There's a colonel and then a senior grade colonel. So they made it up in colonel's ranks. And so I traveled all over China and eastern China. Went as far as the Vietnamese border and up to Manchuria, so got a pretty good spread of their countryside and their life and all that. And I came out of that and I said that on my report that the Army was waiting for another opportunity to save the Republic, which turned out Tiananmen Square. I mean, I couldn't have figured that. They were really displeased with their decline in their stature. And so then I went out and they showed me a Miles demo. And they had the opposing force, and their opposing force, they had little smoke canisters on everybody's headgear. And if you hit the Miles thing, then there'd be a puff of smoke that would tell you that guy was dead. And the enemy had blue smoke. Friendly was red smoke. We're the other way around. The enemy's red smoke. So it's interesting that we're congruent with that they perceive themselves as red and we perceive them as red. So that was sort of an interesting 2 weeks in China.
Have we sold them the Miles stuff?
No, they had homemade. Shows you if you give them the idea, they can go
work it out.
I remember giving a lecture at the Nanjing Military Institute, and at the Nanjing is a Nanjing War College. Now each one of the regions got their own war college,
Okay.
so it's quite a regional or provincial army. And this colonel lady asked me, do you know a military writer named Dupu? And I said, Dupu? She said, yeah, D-E-P-U-Y. I said, yeah, Depew. She said, well, there's an interesting article in this month's Army magazine written by General Dupu. And I wonder, it has to do with matters pertaining to the Army's operations manual, 100-5. This they're talking to me. And I said, yes, what about that? And she said, well, what do you think about A, B, C, and D, which had to do with that particular field manual in Depu's commentary. So you read both of them.
Yeah.
And the Army magazine had just come out. I mean, how'd they get it over there?
Right on top.
More rickety-tick over there, but they'd gotten it very quickly. So it gave you some level of notion that they keep up with the stuff. Doctrine changes,
They're interested, yes.
dialogue in the press and all that kind of stuff. So there was a wide variety of trip taking about that. And when I came back from that, I went to Korea and told the Korean High Command what I'd learned, and I went to see the Japanese High Command when I came out in order to make sure that they knew what I knew and confer with them. The trips to Latin America continued in order to sort of get some estimate of whether or not we were doing the right amount of combat developments or what have you for matters pertaining to low-intensity conflict down there. While I was at TRADOC, that's when we invented the TCDP. I came back in, got the people from Leavenworth and people from Lawrence Livermore to set up what is now the TCDP training program, Tactical Commanders Battle Training Program. And the computer thing lets you do it over and over and over again. So I would say that I believe that from a sensitivity standpoint, that I was reasonably able to go to work without much learning curve down here. I mean, there was transition into that was simple, and I knew the territory, knew the kinds of jobs. Bono had a monthly meeting on requirements, and so we went up to Washington once a month in order to deal with material requirements and got into the ASARCs, did our contribution on that, did our contribution with AMC. Lou Wagner and I got heavily involved in logistics matters. We'd done that when he was the director of research at the department before he went over to be the head of AMC, and we were able to set into motion the shortening the time span when you requisition item at a post-campus station to get it from warehouses, and cut off a considerable amount of time delays by shoving the requisitions instead of sequentially up the line. You shove them directly to the NICP and get a faster response about that. We started at Fort Rucker and then moved it to Fort Hood, and now it's everywhere through the Army.
How did you get into this as a TRADOC skipper?
Well, because I owned the log center.
Oh.
This is right up log center lines.
Right, certainly.
And trying to be more innovative in speeding the access of items of equipment to the field. Lee Solomon had been who's now the commander of AMC at that time, was a brigadier general Aberdeen Proving Grounds. running the school up there. And I recall telling him about my days at Aberdeen when I'd gone to school up there. I was immersed in manuals. And I said a person at Aberdeen ought to be able, an ordnance officer, ought to know enough about an engine to be able to take one apart, put it back together again, know all the functionalities in an engine. He said, well, I'm not sure we've got time to do that. I just gave you an instruction. So he went out and bought 100 two-cycle engines and had them mounted on a workbench. And every student, whether you graduated from West Point or Harvard or William and Mary or wherever the hell you went to school, had to take the engine apart, put the engine back together and get the engine to run as part of the graduation opportunity to do that. Every officer had to learn how to weld. Now, why would we go through this horse shit? Well, the reason you go through this horse shit is because your business is to maintain stuff. And if you don't know if you can get afraid of the implements. So if somebody says, gee whiz, that's a welding torch, you say, geez, I won't put my hand on the welding torch because I put my hand on welding, I'll blow something up or blow the gas up or set myself on fire or burn my mittens off my hand or whatever I'm doing. So I mean, you got to make people comfortable with it. So it's part of what I'd call the gunner's badge syndrome. Mm-hmm. And so we said, if you are an engineer officer, then you got to be capable of setting C4 charges and blowing breastworks and apathy and all that kind of stuff. So we invented the SAPR, Engineer SAPR program, which said you'll have the similar credentials for a sapper that you would for a combat infantryman's badge, or infantryman's not CID, but expert infantryman's badge. So we got that going.
Is there a badge associated with it?
No, but there's a qualification associated with it. You got one on your, like your marksmanship badge.
Right. So it's a sapper.
Yeah. I had asked Reno, I may have said this to you somewhere before and all this, but I asked Reno one day to take all his people in his ANOC and give them C4 and blasting caps and all that stuff, demolition caps, and tell them to blow a tree down. 25% of the people couldn't do it because they didn't know how to hook it up. Yet these were the sergeants that were going to run all this. Went over to the transportation school, so naturally he put that in the curriculum. They all had to go do that. Went over to the transportation school, all of it was being conducted indoors. And I said, everybody here has got to have a license for every vehicle for which that is currently in the transportation fleet. He said, I beg your pardon? I said, license.
Drive truck.
Drive a truck. If you're going to be the truck master, you got to be able to drive it, because you're supposed to supervise everybody driving trucks, license them, make sure you know what to do. You got to drive a truck. Well, that was heresy at the time, so had to change the curriculum and start driving trucks. I mean, sergeants had to drive trucks.
Yeah.
Then we got over to the QM school, and I went down to the pipeline outfit, where they teach them petroleum pipeline. I said, what is the exam here? What's the final qualification? Well, you have to figure out flow rates through the pipeline and all that kind of stuff. I said, what? So let me tell you what the exam is. You give the sergeant, an ANOC sergeant, you give him a piece of a pipe, you give him a FARP, helicopter FARP, fueling, arming, and refueling point equipment. And you give him a grid coordinate to rendezvous at Fort A.P. Hill. And you tell him to meet you there at time X. And 2 hours after that, you fly in a helicopter and refuel it. He said,
So he has some troops there.
Jesus, he said, yeah, he's got BNOC and AIT guys.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Said, Well, geez, that means that he's got to find out where he's going, got to do a map reading exercise. I said, yeah, that's right. So he's got to drive there and find the place in the field you told him to go to. Right, that's right. And oh, by the way, he's got to have the FARP set up, so he got to go through the business of purifying the fuel, making sure there's no debris in there, and checking all that for foreign matter, and then make sure it's strained properly and all that. And then he's got to put up the safety facility, you know, and make sure that if a helicopter crash or he put out the fire and all that. I said, yeah, you see, what we're treating this guy, we're training this guy to be a FARP mechanic. That's what we're trying to do, make him a FARPer. So get out of the schoolhouse and get in the field. So I mean, it's constant prodding about that to go back to the field. And every time you lose sight of that, then he'll creep back inside the schoolhouse. So it's constant push to get it back out of the field. That's when I went down and insisted that master gunners at both Bragg or at Fort Knox and Fort Benning would have to go down range in order to keep their master gunner qualification. Big hubbub. So what I tried to do in the training game was actually install the mentoring program in the day-to-day BNOCs and OBCs and the like, and put people in the field so that they were learning skills that were relatable to what it was they do as lieutenants and captains and sergeants who were running various and sundry things. So that's sort of the attack on the training vector about TRADOC's responsibilities. On the combat developments, we had to do the LARDAP, which is the long-range acquisition, research acquisition plan for bringing items in. We worked heavily with Bob Black, who is a civilian over at AMC, and with Lou Wagner, who is commander of the Army Material Command, in order to do a joint effort so that the Department of the Army wouldn't have differing opinions coming up to them. There's a heavy resolution job about that, detail work about how to do that. I left the recruit training game to John Crosby, and he sort of supervised a basic and advanced individual training game. And I sort of picked it up at the BNOC, and the like. In the leader development, we spent a considerable amount of time in the practical game of leader development, and in the writing of a couple of manuals, including the manual on 25-100, which is the training manual for the Army, which is a new training strategy that Carl Bono had experimented with when he was in the 8th ID, and then more experimentation when he was the TRADOC commander, deputy guy at Leavenworth, and then at TRADOC headquarters itself. So we were refining that and getting that published on Carl's watch, because that's what he wanted as part of his legacy and training. Pretty heavy travel schedule overseas, as into Israel, into Egypt, into Turkey. Come in. Into Turkey. Hi, Frank.
Hello, sir. Hi, sir.
Meet Colonel Kirkland, Faris Kirkland. Dr. Ward is my doctor. He keeps me operating.
He keeps me on my toes.
Anything unusual in that?
No, sir. I did take the liberty of trying to identify what the relative unique toxicities are, but it looks fairly complete. It looks complete, other than some oddball things that might occur that aren't worth worrying about because they're so unlikely.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You doing all right?
Yeah. What else is going on?
That's it.
Okay.
Finished the review process. Dr. Deal was involved in that as well. It was very enlightening.
It was enlightening?
It was
You're going to put it, you put in your protocol, or did you award yourself a protocol?
Well, I think the whole process of writing protocols is a art in its own. And Dr. Deal was telling me that actually at Hopkins, where his wife, the other Dr. Deal, she's a gastroenterologist, expert in liver diseases. And she's a researcher and clinician up there.
Sit down.
They have a whole computer system just to screen protocols, applications that sort of like highlights what the appropriate grammar is and how long things should be, what sections, etc. And that's a whole art that we in the military are clearly at a disadvantage because we don't do this. And it was eye-opening. It was an eye-opening from that point of view. And because these people on the outside, that's how they get paid. They write these grant applications. So it's, it makes it more difficult for, I think, people in the military to compete just on the basics of the road that's traveled to get to the goal, never mind the science behind it. The science behind it, we suffer because we don't have other than places like RARE, AFIP, or RARE, particularly Walter Army Institute of Research, where they have people who are dedicated to the basic science and build all the way up. There are relatively few opportunities where people are advancing along a continuum that is well funded. So
He was at Rare.
oh, okay. So I think it's fair to say for rare, like for example, malaria vaccines, but as one step goes to the next.
Would Thurman be more disposed to be in that bag, doing that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, because of his clinical work.
And they have a long tradition, and they've essentially, the endocrinologists established an empire, and have done very, very well, and they are internationally credible in what they've done through the years. Ken Berman and Len Wachowski have been here for 20 plus years.
Is he an endocrinologist, Bartoski?
Wachowski, endocrinologist. He was the chief of medicine, and now he's chief of medicine at Washington Hospital. Sure, that's where he just retired in January.
He's a world-class guy.
Yes.
See, you have to make provision for that if you want to do it. I mean, have you looked at my tape on the medical corps?
No, sir. I haven't seen it. Don't want to see it. It's going to get me depressed.
It's a good tape.
When did you make this?
Last year at Brook. It's been shown at the Commanders Conference down there. And what it does is it tells you what the vision is for the Army Medical Department and what you have to do in order to have world-class combat casualty care. Then in certain specialties you have to have world-class research. You have to make provision for that. And the only guy I know who's been made provision for that is Berman in the clinical nature. But that means he gets extra people and extra force space, extra money, and a few other things. Then you end up world-class. Now you may choose not to have world-class oncology, but you may want world-class trauma medicine. You want world-class burn medicine, obviously, because they're part and parcel of our business. But would you want world-class OB-GYN work? And the answer is yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because you got 13% of your force is female.
That's interesting you should say that, because that's an area of I think I mentioned before, that's an area where I might say the mission has not been provided with the resource, the service has not been provided
Yeah,
with
but
the
I'm
resources
just
to
saying.
handle the mission.
Yeah, I'm just saying. But if you have 13% of your force that has a particular predilection for a particular claim on medical talent, you got to provide for it. We know burns, that gets everybody. We know trauma, that gets everybody. We know dermos. I mean, as little as I think of them, you need them. Because you can go off and get some esoteric disease over there. Neurosurgery and surgeons, since we're in combat casualty care, you got surgeons you really need to take care of. So you need to look at my tape. I think Jones got a copy of it sometime. Take it home and go to sleep. Put it on while you're getting ready to go to sleep. Nod off.
Sir, all due respect, I'm not sure if I want to hear you speaking the moment before I head off this thing.
Well, you do it when you get up. I mean, that'll get you fired up. You'll have to cut yourself shaving.
That'll get me inspired.
Right.
Because you're on my mind quite a bit already.
I understand that. I get the picture.
So you had a good day?
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell anything yet.
Good.
How many times are you going to do a blood check?
Do it again tomorrow. Every other day. Unless the count starts getting tight, then we'll go to my frequent. Tomorrow they'll check.
You said day 21 was a nadir, huh?
That's what it was last time.
We're in day 3, so I mean, this is the
This is the
imponderable
honeymoon.
future.
This is the honeymoon period.
Right.
As I said, we're starting off in a lot better situation than last time, so.
Take longer to go down. You got to kill them all.
Well, the ones that we're primarily dealing with, that one is low, but maybe we won't have so much side innocent bystander damage. We're mainly looking at the megacarrier sites. Those are the ones that are quite low and we won't have so much problem with the white count. Okay, sir. Very nice.
He's a good newsman. Frank, have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
We're
Take
being
care.
all we can be.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
When you hit the nadir, is it a nadir that's just counts, or do you feel like you're in the?
Well,
pits
you have to
also?
stop eating uncooked food. Can't eat any uncooked food. You have to be very careful. You don't get any scratches. No dogs around. I got 2 dogs, but they go away during the spare time.
Don't have a sitter.
And if the reds go down, you feel it. You can't tell it on the whites, but the reds go down, then
Energy goes.
your energy level goes away because it's your oxygen carrier.
Right.
So you can begin to tell that walking up down steps, any exertion whatsoever. You can tell. They've gotten down to 25,000 reds. Your normal number is 54,000. But at that time, you're huffing and puffing because you essentially cut your oxygen supply in half.
Yes.
So you huff and puff.
You can get cramps and all kinds of things. But you haven't had those?
No, not to worry about it. It's exciting.
Yeah, well, it's a hazardous trip, is it not?
Yeah, well, first of all, this is round 2 on this particular subroutine. And, it could not work. And accounts could not come back. And then if they don't, well, then we're in the soup. If they come back, then hopefully come back with the right production of megakaryocytes, which are the precursor cells for platelets, then you're okay. But if they don't come back, then you either have to go on transfusions or you have to go on, I have to go down to Fort San Antonio, Brook Army Medical Center, and you have to go through a bone marrow transplant because I have bone marrow on storage down there, cryogenic storage.
Is that your own?
It's my own. It's called autologous bone marrow transplant. And you give your own, they clean it up with chemo, and then they reimplant it. But in my case, you'd have to go through, I got to go through a big chemo regimen that flat puts you out, and I'll be in an incubator there for a while.
Yeah.
Because they drive all your counts to nothing then in order to reinsert the marrow.
Reinsert.
And then there's no guarantee the marrow works. So, I mean, that's shitty then.
That's shitty, yes.
So hopefully we don't have to do that, but that's the ace in the hole.
Well, it's
Hope
good.
I know that.
It's good to have multiple lines of defense.
Sir?
It's good to have multiple lines.
Yeah,
of
no, that's right, and
defense.
that's what we're trying to do, is trying to go, there are also 2 other drugs we haven't tried yet, called interleukin-6 and interleukin-11. And we are holding that out because those drugs haven't had enough trials on them yet. So we'd have to debate whether or not we take that one. If this one doesn't work. If you keep taking transfusions, pretty soon you build up antibodies that eat up the transfusion as soon as it comes in the body, so you don't get any benefit out of it.
Wow. Talk about second and third order consequences.
You bet.
Well, I think I believe you now.
All right.
Come back.
Let's see what we're doing here next week. next week, all goes well. Monday is Washington's birthday, and I'm doing nothing on that day. That's good. The 22nd, readiness, I'm to work at Pentagon. Okay. Then, registration. Then Wednesday and Thursday and Friday are all open.
Let's do it Monday.
Washington's birthday.
You rather do it here or at?
This is fine, no, because I don't know what status I'll be in by then, so that'll work. Do it, yeah. One of the things we didn't talk about, which is a significant thing, is we did not talk about women in the Army.
No, we didn't.
And the women in the Army experience starts with Westmoreland. As the Chief of Staff, when he is issued instructions to integrate West Point by 1980, and the number of women are beginning to increase in the Jimmy Carter administration. And as the PA&E, we began to market how many women there would be in the Army and what the recruiting resources were and that sort of thing. And that's when we began to get into attrition rates, and which were significantly higher than male attrition rates for a variety of reasons. I'll come to some of those later. But even upper mental category women would attrit faster than the same mental category males. And so you got into a substantial cost problem with respect to the advent of bringing a large number of women on board. And then you that's sort of one thing that as a PA&E I was able to begin to observe and plan for and figure out how many people to recruit and all that sort of thing.
Were they attriting higher than Cat 4 non-high school graduate males?
Upper mental category women? No.
Right.
Upper mental category women would attrit at about the same level as mental category 4 males. They ran something like 40-some%, as I recall it, against upper mental category 1 male, or 1 to 3A males, which was in the order of 25 to 26% in those days, in the mid-70s, late 70s. So if you go through sort of stage 1 is the integration of women, then you go into stage 2, which is the orders come to integrate into West Point. Meanwhile, there is information coming back from the field that maybe you have too many women in a single kind of unit, like there are too many women in signal units or too many women in medical units, etc. There was substantial amount of blowback from the field as to whether or not women could handle chores in the FTXs and the CBXs and that kind of stuff that were done in the field conditions. Matters concerning pregnancy and all that were beginning to come to the fore. the same time you begin to are we properly taking care of our female soldiers with the requisite medical attention and that kind of business. So a variety of issues were beginning to spring up in the late 70s about women. Now, one of the things that, and those issues were bubbling around in the PA&E because they were resource-related issues. Now, by the time I get to be the recruiting guy, one of the things we absolutely stopped doing was recruiting any non-high school graduate women, because non-high school graduate women would invariably recruit out at or have a dropout rate of up to 60%.
Who made that decision? Was that you as recruiting commander?
Well, yeah, I recommended it to the DESPER, and they said fine. And so we stopped recruiting all non-high school graduate women.
And that was in 79 or 80?
79, early 80. Then we eliminated Cat 4 women. And then essentially we worked on high school graduate 1 to 3A and 3B women, and tried to focus on 1 to 3A women because their stay rates were the highest. Now, when I get to be the personnel chief, Jack Marsh had just come on board in about May of 1981 as Secretary of the Army in the Reagan administration. And one of the early things, Jack had high tentacles to the Congress because he himself had been a congressman for 4 terms. And so he was well regarded in Congress and knew a lot of people in Congress, and was well acquainted with what I'd call the trickle-down authority from Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution on raising armies and the responsibilities of Congress on the one hand versus the administration on the other, or the executive branch on the other. Called me up one day and said to me, we have to come to grips with a policy on the use of women in the U.S. Army, because there are 2 laws on the books currently. It's 1981. One of which precludes the use of women in combat jobs, in combat ships, aboard ships, and the other excludes women from being in combat aircraft. No law pertaining to the Army.
Ground.
So he said, in the absence of a law, I want you to draft a policy statement that we can adopt pertaining to the utilization of females in the U.S. Army that is in the spirit of the 2 laws associated with the Navy and the Air Force, the explicit law. So I hired a guy to help me work this particular paper, and his name was Colonel Chuck Hines, Charles Hines. And Chuck Hines was a PhD from Johns Hopkins, military police officer, very smart guy in personnel matters. And he was also a minority officer, an Afro-American. And I gave Chuck a very small staff. He had about 3 guys working for him. A guy whose last name is like Kowalt or Kowalski or something like that, who is a MSC officer. And a 3rd officer whose name escapes me at the moment. those are two guys you sort of want to talk to a little bit. Durso was the other guy, Tony Durso. And I gave them this task, and that was their single piece of work. And they did a brilliant strategy piece of work. And it took us probably close to a year to get that work crystallized to where it would be suitable for having a rational base on which to proceed, one, to codify it in the Army, and two, to get the relevant OSD bureaucracy to make sure it was squared away. Meanwhile, the DACOWITS, which is the Department of Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Armed Services, met once every 6 months and was in the business of encouraging the Secretary of Defense to broaden the opportunities for women in the armed forces. And the DACOWITS had one distinguishing characteristic, which is not necessarily a good one, and that is that if you were ever, although it was a politically based committee that was appointed by whatever the sitting administration was, they had the unfortunate rule inside the DACOWITS structure that said